This is the Mags on Media special with tech guru and social transformer Harper Reed.
So they're on the front lines of our country's future.
Electioneering is an ever-evolving business, even for leaders like Barack Obama. Harper and his team were tasked with growing the Democrats' voter numbers through the use of mobile and social technology.
In 2008, the iPhone was about a year old. Android phones had just been released to the market. Facebook pages were created because of the Barack Obama's campaign. Twitter was used by hippies, young people like yourselves. And all these things, were just kind of, they weren't status quo. They were just the things that were fancy, little gadgets in the corner. In 2012, our parents are using them. This is weird, but it's also really important. So suddenly, obviously this is in the US, in middle America, people are using Twitter. Android is huge. I know it's huge here as well. And all these things became normal.
Mobilizing grassroots volunteers was something the campaign was very good at. And the reason that we were good at it is because we had a really great field team. And the field team's job was 100% to get the grassroots going. And there's two guys that were kind of the head of this, Mitch Stewart and Jeremy Bird. And they really were one of the main reasons why the campaign was successful. And what they did is they facilitated an organization that just kind of built up this grassroots team. What I helped with was just helped with some software, some facilitation of that. And so our goal was to be what we called a force multiplier. So technology, as we viewed it, should only augment our current interactions. And so rather than saying, with technology, we will get all of these volunteers, we said, how can we use technology to get 10% more or 20% more, just a little bit more, just a little bit over the top what we thought we could do. Talking about obstacles or anything like that is very difficult because everything was iterative, and so the obstacles were never obstacles. It was just like a little bump. You just went over it and you just figured out how to solve the problem. And so since we specifically talking about messaging or about how do we target various volunteers or voters or what have you, a lot of it was just testing. So we were very metrics driven, and so we would test a message, and if it worked, we went with it. If it didn't work, we didn't. Over and over and over again, hundreds of times a day. And so since that was kind of how we did it, it's hard to say, this is what we did wrong, this is what we did right. Because everything, when you look back at it, everything just kind of worked. And the reason is because we didn't focus on what didn't work. We only focused on what did work.
It all sounds really simple now, but revolutionizing voting technology is no easy feat. In developing a system that works, Harper's team basically dealt with common problems experienced by most brands and organizations on a daily basis.
The main thing that brands can take away from the 2012 campaign, and this is probably the biggest takeaway that I took from it, is that the only way to integrate technology and design and the creatives and data and analytics and then the business process together is to really invite all of these various roles and people into the boardroom. And so when you have those executive decisions that are being made, should we go down this path, should we go down this path? Without those people as stakeholders in that decision, then the decision is made largely without the people who are executing it. And so it used to be that it was very easy for a bunch of executives to sit in a boardroom and make a decision and then pass that over this giant wall to like the creatives or to the tech people. Now, as we move from getting rid of the E on the front of everything, we have to involve them in every decision. And it doesn't mean that they should be driving the decision. That just means that they should be there helping make the decision. So if you look at the difference between the Republicans in the United States and the Democrats in the United States, in 2012, one of the biggest differences was in the Democratic side and on our campaign, there was a guy named Teddy Goff who was the head of creative digital side. Dan Wagner, which is the head of the analytics side. Myself was head of technology. We were involved in the daily senior staff meetings. So every single decision that was made in the campaign, we were there to be a part of. We were involved in a lot of meetings with the executive staff. So a lot of times if big decisions happened in tech, they were apprised of it and they helped make those decisions. And so it wasn't that the campaign management necessarily knew tech. It was that it was the tech responsibility to train them and help them understand it, and it was their responsibility to train us and help us understand the decisions so we can make the decisions together. And making those decisions together meant that the executive team had buy-in into our decisions and we had buy-in from them. So they would support us and we would support them if something came up. Without that integration between digital analytics and technology into the executive staff, I don't think it would have worked. And so you look at the Republican side, there's a chance, I'm not completely sure if this is true, but I've heard that the technology team was even in a different building. You know, they were just very separate. And it was just how it would be 2 or 3 years ago. Like, I mean, it's not crazy that they did it that way, but the innovation here was, if there was an innovation, was that Jim Messina, the campaign manager, all these guys brought analytics and digital and tech into the decision-making process. And that was a big innovation. What ends up happening with big brands is big brands oftentimes have a bunch of people who have been these entrenched decision makers. And they've been that way for a very long time. And they've been this place where what happens is a proposal comes to them and they just say yes or no, right? But they say yes or no regardless of the buy-in of the organization and regardless of the buy-in of the people who are building and doing. And then you see the people who are working, that's working very well. And the reason it's working very well is because they have this kind of holistic approach where they're involving everyone in this decision making. And this doesn't mean that you need to have your company vote on every single thing. It just means that if you have the leadership from these various different groups inside of the decision making process, and I call this the boardroom, right? So if you're talking about, how often was the board, in the boardroom where the decisions just made by a CEO and various board members. If you have a CEO, a CTO, a chief analytics person, and a chief design person all in the same room, then when you go through these big decisions, you have, maybe a little longer, maybe a little harder, but you have all of the stakeholders in there. And then once they have buy-in, once they agree, then they will fight in their departments to make it happen. You end up not just ironing it out, but you just don't even, the problems that are there about buy-in, which is largely, I think, a lot of the problems about turf, about, well, this isn't my project. This is just something that came from above. I was just told to do this. A lot of that stuff just kind of disappears.
Overall, we had about 120 tech staff. And this is really important because this is about 10 times what we had in 2008. And so that's kind of the scale difference. We started from absolutely zero. So when I walked in, there was no source code. There was nothing. There was no infrastructure. There was nothing left over from 2008. And remember, in 2008, all this stuff was invented. And we couldn't invent anything because we only had 18 months, which is a very short period of time. And so we had to focus on one thing only, and that is execution.
Harper's team built an app which they called Gordon. The main idea was to give voters a gentle nudge to remind them to go and vote.
It helped us understand who was voting. And so Gordon was a really neat app made by a great company called Van. And the history of Gordon was we had an app in 2008 that was just like the app for the Republicans called Orca. And in 2008, our app was called Houdini, and it crashed in 2008, and it crashed midday, or actually early in the morning, so it just totally screwed up. So Gordon, though, was the replacement for Houdini, and historically, Gordon is the guy who killed Houdini. So we named it Gordon kind of as a call that we wanted it to kill Houdini. So in the US, you have poll watchers, and so you have this person from the Democratic Party or from the campaign who sits there and watches who votes. And when those people vote, we kind of cross them off a list. And then we can get an understanding of who has voted in this community so that we can go remind people to vote. So it's not necessarily about getting new voters, it's about getting people just to vote in general. Because Democrats largely, they forget to vote, they're busy. Voting, traditionally hasn't been as important for Democrats as it has been for Republicans. And so we just need to remind people to vote and get people out there. And so that was something that was all day long. It worked very, very well. And it was definitely helped out.
With our own elections drawing closer, how can this kind of technology be applied locally? We'll have more when Mags on Media continues.
News that moves. ENCA.com.